So what is your ego mind? So a few of you that know me already, you know that your ego is that ongoing internal dialogue, that self-talk that we have going on inside our head. But the ego is actually a lot more than that. The ego is also our defensive mind. The ego is the part of us that confines us into our own experience. It's the part of us that makes us think we're separate from one another. It's our bubble, our me bubble. And we're living in a world where the vast majority of people are living in this inflated sense of self. The ego is our sense of self. So many of us have this inflated sense of self, and we're living with this inflated sense of separateness between us all. This is one of the ways that the ego mind disables us. Your ego keeps you in your own world. Everyone has an ego. We all need an ego because our ego is our sense of self. But your ego keeps you in your own world. Roy's ego keeps him in his own world. Duran's ego keeps him in his own world. My ego keeps me in my own world. Everyone's ego keeps them in their own world. Now I want you to imagine that every single one in here is their own planet. This is planet Colleen. This is planet Selma. And over here we have the lovely planet Roy. Everyone here is their own planet. Ego is your gravity. It's what keeps you together. It's what maintains your sense of self. Every planet has their own energy, their own resources. We all had our own experiences, our own history. Every planet's in its own evolutionary process. And every planet has its own ego. When another planet comes and collides with your planet, or your sense of self, your ego's job is to maintain and uphold your sense of self. But the problem is that we're living in this world where we all have this, not all of us, but the majority of us have this inflated sense of self. So our ego response is hypersensitive, is amplified. Our sense of entitlement and expectations deafen us. And our perceptions narrow, and our need to be right expands. And we usually unidentify with the colliding planet. And this happens because, for the most part, we don't understand the planet that's colliding with us. The ego mind, or our gravity field, is more concerned about maintaining our sense of self, upholding our self-image, than it is about building bridges. This affects us personally, this affects us professionally, and this affects us as a species. I've got a story that outlines this quite nicely. A therapist that I know, we're going to call her Jody. She's a bodywork therapist. She would get so frustrated after treating this one client of hers. We'll call this client Vanessa. Every time she would do body work, every time Jody would do body work on Vanessa, Jody would be so frustrated that Vanessa was telling her how to do her job. She was telling her that her hand positions were wrong. She was telling her to go in a different direction. Jody felt that Vanessa completely undermined all of her experience, all of her years of practice and her education. So Planet Jody was getting very defensive because Planet Vanessa was colliding with it. And this progressed, this got worse. Jody was getting really upset. So eventually it got to the point where I offered to take on Vanessa as a client. So I started working with Vanessa, and at first I could totally see what Jody's problem was, because it was challenging. It did challenge my ego. Everything you did was wrong throughout the treatment. But I made sure to keep the treatment about Vanessa, not about me. I had to simmer my own ego, take down my own gravity. And after working with Vanessa for a while, we developed a really good relationship. And she disclosed to me not long after that she's had a life of her whole childhood she was molested. Can you imagine? You never know the devastation that's going on in someone else's planet. You never know what's going on in someone else's world. And a lot of time, our ego mind is so cranked up, our gravity is so cranked up, that we never will. And this is what happened with Jody. Jody was more concerned about being right. She was taking all of Vanessa's requests personally. She would go into defensive mode rather than understanding mode. She would go into rejection mode instead of listening mode. She lost an amazing client because of it. This is one of the ways our ego mind interferes with our life. The ego is so busy, our gravity, we're so busy fighting, defending this unnecessary sense of self. We're burning unnecessary energy, unnecessary resources. We're creating unnecessary enemies, fighting unnecessary battles. So yes, we need an ego. Yes, we all need a sense of self. But most of us need a lot less. Can you imagine if we lived in a planet where everyone's sense of self, everyone's sense of separation was minimal? Can you imagine if we lived in an egoless world? So the next time that someone collides with your planet, the next time you feel like you don't like someone, take a step back, turn your ego stat down, take down your gravity a little bit, and know that anyone you don't like, you just don't understand.